Captain Jake Morrison stood at the viewing window of his transport ship, watching the massive structure of Nexus Prime grow larger as they approached. The space station was enormous, easily 10 times bigger than any human-built station. It looked like a giant metal flower floating in the darkness of space, with dozens of docking arms reaching out in all directions. Ships from across the galaxy were attached to those arms like metal seeds on a strange plant. Jake had been a soldier for 20 years before becoming a diplomat. He knew how to fight, how to lead men into battle, and how to survive in the worst conditions. But this mission made him more nervous than any combat he had ever faced. Today, he would represent humanity at one of the most important diplomatic meetings in galactic history. Behind him, his 12-year-old son Danny pressed his face against another window, his eyes wide with wonder. The boy had never seen anything like this before, neither had Jake, to be honest, but he tried to hide his amazement. As the human delegation leader, he needed to appear confident and in control. "Dad, look at that ship," Danny whispered, pointing at a vessel that looked like a giant crystal. "It's so beautiful." Jake smiled despite his nervousness. Bringing Danny on this mission had been controversial. Many people thought a child had no place in such serious diplomatic talks. But the Galactic Federation had specifically requested that each species bring representatives of their youth. They wanted to show that this was about building a future for all species, not just the current generation of leaders. Danny was perfect for the job, was smart, curious, and had a natural way of making people like him. He also represented something important about humans, their care for their children, and their hope for the future. "Remember what we practiced?" Jake said quietly to his son. "Speak clearly, be polite to everyone, and stay close to me at all times." Danny nodded. He had been preparing for this mission for months, learning about different alien cultures, and practicing diplomatic protocols. Despite his young age, he took his responsibilities seriously. The transport ship shuddered slightly as it connected to one of Nexus's Prime's docking arms. Through the speakers, the pilot's voice announced their arrival. "Come to Nexus Prime, the diplomatic heart of the galaxy. Please prepare for disembarkation." Jake gathered his small team. Besides Danny, there were only 3 other humans on this mission. Dr. Helen Brooks was their cultural expert, a woman who had spent years studying alien societies. Lieutenant Ben Cooper was their security officer, though his weapons had been left on the ship, according to station rules. Finally, there was Amy Rodriguez, their communications specialist and translator. The group was small compared to other delegations, but that was typical for humans. Earth had only joined the Galactic Federation 15 years ago, and they were still considered newcomers. Most of the established species looked down on humanity as weak and primitive. Humans had no special abilities like telepathy or energy manipulation. They were not particularly strong or fast compared to many alien species. What they did have was determination, adaptability, and a strong sense of family and community. As they walked through the docking tube into Nexus Prime, Jake felt the artificial gravity adjust to galactic standard. The air tasted different too, cleaner somehow, but with a metallic hint that reminded him they were breathing recycled atmosphere. The station's interior was breathtaking. The main corridor was wide enough for a small aircraft to fly through, with a ceiling that seemed to stretch up forever. Aliens of dozens of different species walked, floated, or crawled along the polished floors. Jake recognized some of them from his briefing materials, but many were completely unknown to him. A group of Zephyrians glided past, their translucent bodies shimmering like living glass. Near an information kiosk, several Macrons communicated through rapid flashing lights on their metallic shells. The diversity was incredible, but also intimidating. Danny stayed close to his father, his eyes taking in everything around them. The boy showed no fear, only fascination. Jake was proud of his son's composure. Many adults would have been overwhelmed. By this environment, they were met by a station guide, a member of the Althurian species. She was humanoid in shape, but covered in fine silver fur, with large eyes that seemed to see everything at once. Her name was difficult for human tongues to pronounce, so she told them to call her Silver. "Welcome to Nexus Prime," Silver said, in accented but clear English. I will escort you to your quarters and then to the orientation meeting. The opening ceremony begins tomorrow. As they walked through the station, Silver explained the layout and rules. Nexus Prime was neutral territory, belonging to no single species. Violence was strictly forbidden, and any disputes were handled by the station's security forces. Station housed permanent embassies from 43 different species, with facilities designed to accommodate the needs of each race. Their quarters were in the human section, which was smaller than most but comfortable. The rooms were designed to feel familiar to Earthborn humans, with gravity, atmosphere, and lighting that matched home conditions. Jake was grateful for this small comfort. After settling in, they attended the orientation meeting in one of the station's great halls. Representatives from every major species were present, creating a cacophony of different languages, sounds, and even smells. Universal translators helped with communication, but they were not perfect. Misunderstandings were common. Jake noticed that many of the other delegates barely acknowledged the human presence. Some species, like the peaceful Luminar, were polite but distant. Others, particularly the more militaristic races, seemed to view humans with barely concealed contempt. The Draknari delegation was impossible to miss. They were 8 feet tall, covered in scales that ranged from dark green to black, with powerful claws and teeth designed for tearing flesh. They were known throughout the galaxy as fierce warriors who respected only strength. Their leader, Commander Vex Drachno, sat with his arms crossed, his yellow eyes scanning the room like a predator looking for prey. When the human delegation was introduced, Commander Vex made a sound that might have been laughter, but it was not friendly. Several other Draknari joined in, creating a rumbling noise that made other delegates turn to look. Jake felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his expression neutral. He had dealt with bullies before. Danny, sitting beside his father, seemed unaware of the hostility directed at them. He was too busy watching a group of crystalline beings who communicated through musical tones. The boy was fascinated by how they changed colors as they spoke. The orientation covered the schedule for the next week. There would be formal presentations from each species, cultural exchange events, and various committee meetings. The goal was to strengthen the bonds between Federation members and discuss expansion into new territories. Jake found himself wondering what humanity could possibly contribute to such an advanced civilization. Earth's technology was primitive compared to most Federation members. Humans had no unique resources or abilities that other species couldn't provide better. Yet here they were, invited to participate in shaping the galaxy's future. As the meeting ended and delegates began to disperse, Danny tugged on his father's sleeve. "Dad, can I get something to drink? All this talking made me thirsty." Jake nodded, and they made their way toward the refreshment area. The station provided food and drinks suitable for various species, though humans had to be careful about what they consumed. Not everything that looked edible was safe for human digestion. Danny was carrying a folder of ceremonial documents that he would present during tomorrow's opening ceremony. The papers were not particularly important, mostly symbolic gestures of friendship and cooperation. But they were part of his official duties as youth ambassador, as they walked across the great hall. Neither father nor son noticed Commander Vex Drachnos, watching them with cold, calculating eyes. The Draknari commander had been looking for an opportunity to demonstrate human weakness to the assembled delegates. Tomorrow's ceremony would provide the perfect stage for such a demonstration. The first day at Nexus Prime ended peacefully, with Jake tucking Danny into bed in their quarters. The boy was excited about the next day's ceremony, chattering about all the interesting aliens he had met. Jake listened with a smile, proud of his son's enthusiasm and natural diplomatic skills. Neither of them could have imagined that within 24 hours their lives would be forever changed by an act of casual violence that would shock the galaxy and awaken something dangerous in the human spirit. The great ceremonial hall of Nexus Prime had never looked more magnificent. Thousands of beings from across the galaxy filled the massive space, creating a spectacular display of diversity. The ceilings stretched up like a cathedral, with holographic displays showing the flags and symbols of every Federation member species. Jake Morrison stood with the human delegation near the front of the hall. feeling both proud and nervous. This was the moment they had been preparing for during months of training. Danny stood beside him, looking sharp in his formal diplomatic uniform. The boy carried a leather folder containing ceremonial documents that he would present during the ceremony. The opening ceremony was designed to celebrate unity among the Federation species. Each delegation would present gifts and formal statements of cooperation. It was meant to be a peaceful, hopeful event that showed how different species could work together. Danny had practiced his presentation dozens of times. He would walk to the center of the hall, present the documents to the Federation Council, and give a short speech about Earth's commitment to galactic peace. It was a simple task, but an important one. The boy represented the future of human participation in galactic affairs. Remember to speak slowly and clearly, Jake whispered to his son as they waited for their turn. And don't forget to bow to the council after your speech. Danny nodded, though Jake could see he was nervous. The boy's hands were slightly shaking as he held the document folder. It was natural to be nervous in front of such an important audience. The Draknari delegation sat in a place of honor near the front of the hall. Commander Vex Dracnos lounged in his chair like a king on his throne, his yellow eyes scanning the crowd with obvious boredom. He looked annoyed to be sitting through what he clearly considered a waste of time. Other Draknari warriors sat around him, all looking equally unimpressed by the ceremony. They whispered among themselves in their harsh language occasionally, laughing at comments that made other delegates uncomfortable. It was clear they had little respect for the peaceful nature of the proceedings. The ceremony began with speeches from the Federation leaders. One by one, representatives from the major species stood to talk about cooperation, peace, and shared prosperity. The words were beautiful, but Jake noticed that some delegates seemed more interested in the political advantages of their statements than in their actual meaning. When the Zephyrian ambassador spoke about harmony between species, several Draknari warriors made snorting sounds. When the Luminari representative discussed the importance of protecting the weak, Commander Vex rolled his eyes dramatically. Jake felt his jaw tighten. The Draknari behavior was rude, but there was nothing he could do about it without causing a diplomatic incident. He just hoped they would show more respect when Danny gave his presentation. Finally, it was humanity's turn. The Federation announcer called for the human delegation to present their ceremonial offering. Jake squeezed Danny's shoulder encouragingly. As the boy stepped forward, Danny walked across the great hall with careful, measured steps. Every eye in the massive space was focused on him. The 12-year-old boy looked tiny in such a vast area, but he walked with confidence and dignity that made his father proud. As Danny approached the center of the hall, he had to pass near the Draknari delegation. Commander Vex watched him with obvious contempt, his yellow eyes following the boy's movement like a predator tracking prey. Jake felt a sudden chill of concern. Something about Vex's expression was wrong. The Draknari commander was not just showing disrespect, he looked angry, as if Danny's very presence was a personal insult. Danny reached the designated presentation area and turned to face the Federation Council. He opened his folder and began to remove the ceremonial documents. The papers were beautifully decorated with symbols of Earth and humanity, representing hope for the future. At that moment, disaster struck in a way that no one could have predicted. As Danny turned to face the council, one corner of his document folder bumped against Commander Vex's outstretched leg. It was the smallest possible contact, barely a touch. The folder did not even leave a mark on Vex's scaled skin. To any reasonable being, it would have been completely insignificant. But Commander Vex was not reasonable. The Draknari commander's eyes flashed with rage. In his warrior culture, any contact from an inferior being was considered an insult. The fact that it came from a human child, a species he already despised, made it unforgivable in his mind. "You dare touch me, human whelp?" Vex roared, his voice echoing through the suddenly silent hall. Danny turned in confusion, clearly not understanding what had happened. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to silence." Vex stood up to his full 8-foot height, towering over the small boy. "We'll learn respect for your betters." Jake started moving toward his son, but he was too far away. The attack happened faster than anyone could react. Commander Vex drew back his massive clawed hand and struck Danny across the head with devastating force. The blow was not intended to be disciplinary. It was intended to cause serious harm. Vex put the full strength of his warrior training behind the strike. The sound of the impact echoed through the great hall like a gunshot. Danny's small body was lifted off the ground by the force of the blow and thrown several feet through the air. He landed hard on the polished floor and did not move, for a moment that seemed to last forever. The great hall was completely silent. Thousands of beings stared in shock at the motionless form of the human child. Blood began to pool beneath Danny's head, dark red against the white floor. Jake reached his son in seconds, dropping to his knees beside the unconscious boy. Danny's face was pale and his breathing was shallow. Blood ran from his ears and nose. Signs of serious head trauma. Jake had seen enough combat injuries to know how bad this was. Danny, can you hear me?" Jake's voice cracked as he cradled his son's head, trying to stop the bleeding. "Someone get a doctor." Now, the hall erupted into chaos. Some delegates rushed forward to help while others sat frozen in shock. Medical personnel ran toward the scene with emergency equipment. But through it all, Commander Vex stood calmly in place, showing no sign of remorse or concern. "The boy needed to learn respect," Vex said loudly, his voice carrying over the confusion. "Perhaps now he will be more careful around his superiors." Jake looked up at the Draknari commander with an expression of pure hatred. If he had been armed, he would have killed Vex on the spot. This was a diplomatic venue. Jake was surrounded by witnesses from every major species in the galaxy. Dr. Helen Brooks reached them first, her medical training taking over despite her horror at what had happened. She immediately began checking Danny's vital signs while calling for emergency transport to the medical bay. "How bad is it?" Jake asked, though he was afraid to hear the answer. "Severe head trauma," Helen said quietly. "Possible skull fracture. We need to get him to surgery immediately." As the medical team carefully lifted Danny onto a stretcher, Jake stood and faced Commander Vex. The Draknari was cleaning his claws casually, as if he had just swatted an annoying insect. "You struck a child," Jake said, his voice deadly quiet. "An innocent child who meant no harm?" "I struck a disrespectful inferior who needed to learn his place," Vex replied without emotion. In Draknari culture, such lessons are necessary for maintaining proper order. In human culture, hurting children is the act of a coward. Vex's eyes flashed dangerously. "Are you calling me a coward, human?" Before Jake could respond, Federation security officers stepped between them. The lead officer, a member of the peacekeeping arbitrator species, held up his hands for calm. "This incident will be investigated thoroughly," the officer announced. "All parties will remain calm while we determine what happened and how to proceed." Jake wanted to laugh bitterly. What happened was obvious to everyone in the hall. A groan. Warrior had nearly killed a child for accidentally brushing against him. But he knew that politics would complicate even this clear-cut situation, as Danny was rushed to the medical bay. Jake followed close behind. He could hear the murmur of shocked conversations filling the great hall. Representatives from different species were already debating what they had witnessed, and Jake could tell that opinions were divided. Some species, particularly the more peaceful ones, were clearly horrified by the attack on a child. Others, especially those with warrior cultures similar to the Draknari, seemed to view it as an unfortunate but understandable response to disrespect. Commander Vex remained in the ceremonial hall, accepting congratulations from some of his fellow Draknari. To them, he had upheld the honor of their species by putting an inferior being in its place. The fact that the inferior being was a 12-year-old boy seemed irrelevant to their thinking in the medical bay. Jake held Danny's hand. While alien doctors worked frantically to save his life, the boy's condition was critical. His skull was fractured in multiple places, and there was dangerous swelling in his brain. "Will he live?" Jake asked the head physician. "We are doing everything possible," the doctor replied. "The next few hours will be crucial." Brain injuries are always unpredictable, especially in young humans. Jake squeezed his son's hand gently. The boy looked so small and fragile on the medical table, surrounded by machines and tubes. This was not how they're diplomatic. mission was supposed to go. Jake Morrison sat beside his son's bed in the medical bay, watching the rise and fall of Danny's chest. The boy looked so small, connected to all those machines. Tubes and wires seemed to cover every part of his body. The alien medical equipment beeped and hummed constantly, monitoring his vital signs. It had been 6 hours since Commander Vex had struck Danny. 6 hours since. Jake's world had collapsed into this sterile room filled with the smell of antiseptic and the sound of machines. Keeping his child alive? The doctors said Danny's skull was fractured in 3 places. There was swelling in his brain. They were doing everything they could, but they could not promise he would wake up. Dr. Helen Brooks entered the room quietly. Her face was pale and her eyes were red from crying. She had been like a second mother to Danny during their preparation for this mission. Seeing him hurt like this was breaking her heart. "Any change?" she whispered. Jake shook his head without looking away from his son. "The same. The doctors say the next 24 hours are critical." His voice was rough from not speaking for hours. He had been sitting here in silence, just watching and waiting. Helen placed a gentle hand on Jake's shoulder. "The whole station is talking about what happened. Many of the other delegates are shocked. Some are demanding that Commander Vex be arrested." "And the others?" Jake asked. Helen's expression darkened. "The others are saying it was a cultural misunderstanding. They claim the Draknari have different ideas about discipline and respect. They want to handle this quietly through diplomatic channels." Jake's hands clenched into fists. The idea that someone could nearly kill his child and call it a cultural difference made him sick. He had seen real cultural differences during his military service. This was not that. This was a grown warrior attacking a defenseless child for no reason other than cruelty. Lieutenant Ben Cooper appeared in the doorway. His face was grim and his jaw was tight with anger. "Captain, I need to speak with you." Jake did not want to leave Danny's side, but he could see that Ben had important news. He kissed his son's forehead gently and stepped into the corridor with his security officer. "What is it?" Jake asked. Ben looked around to make sure they were alone. "I've been monitoring communications back to Earth. The news about Danny's attack has spread faster than wildfire. Every human colony, every ship, every military base knows what happened." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "What kind of response are we seeing?" "Unlike anything I've ever witnessed," Ben said. "The civilian populations are demanding justice. Military commanders are requesting permission to move their fleets toward Nexus Prime. The President himself has called an emergency session of the Earth Council." Jake ran his hand through his hair. This was exactly what he had feared. Humans were known for their emotional reactions, but this could spiral out of control quickly. "What about Admiral Carter? Is she still 3 days away?" Ben shook his head. "She's pushing her engines to maximum. She'll be here in 18 hours with the entire Third Fleet. That's 47 ships, Captain. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and support vessels. She's bringing enough firepower to level this station." Weight of the situation hit Jake like a physical blow. He had come here as a diplomat, trying to build bridges between humanity and the rest of the galaxy. Now his son's attack might trigger the first major conflict between humans and the Galactic Federation. "There's more," Ben continued. "Intercepting transmissions from other species. Some of them are getting nervous about the human response. They're not used to seeing this kind of unified reaction from us." Jake thought about this. Humans were relatively new to galactic politics. Most alien species saw them as individuals who sometimes worked together, but rarely as a unified force. They did not understand how quickly humans could come together. When one of their own was threatened, especially a child, Amy Rodriguez joined them in the corridor. Her face was flushed with excitement and anger. "Captain, you need to hear this. I've been monitoring the quantum communication networks. The attack on Danny is being broadcast on every human world, but it's not just news reports." "What do you mean?" Jake asked. "People are sharing personal messages. Parents are recording videos of their own children talking about how they would feel if someone hurt them. Veterans are sharing stories about protecting the innocent. Teachers are explaining to their students why what happened to Danny was wrong." Amy paused, her voice growing stronger. "God, it's becoming more than just news, Captain. It's becoming a rallying cry. Humans across the galaxy are seeing Danny as representing all human children. They're seeing the attack as an attack on humanity itself. Jake felt something stirring in his chest. It was not just anger anymore. It was something deeper, something that connected him to every other human who had heard about his son's injuries. For the first time since the attack, it felt like he was not alone in his pain. Dr. Helen Brooks came out of the medical bay, her face tight with worry. "Jake, the doctors want to speak with you. Danny's condition has changed." Jake's heart stopped. He rushed back into the medical bay, followed by his team. The alien doctors were gathered around Danny's bed, their expressions unreadable. Head. Physician, a tall being with blue skin and 6 arms, turned to face them. "The swelling in the boy's brain has stabilized," the doctor said. "This is good news. However, we cannot predict when or if he will regain consciousness. The trauma was severe." Jake felt his knees weaken with relief. Stabilized was better than worse. It meant Danny was fighting, just like his father had taught him. "Can I stay with him?" Jake asked. "Of course. Family presence often helps in recovery." As the doctors left, Jake returned to his chair beside Danny's bed. But now his mind was working differently. The grief and fear were still there, but they were being joined by something else. Something cold and calculating that he recognized from his military days. Ben Cooper sat down across from him. "Captain, I've been thinking about what happens next. The Galactic Council wants to handle this quietly, but our people back home won't accept that. They want justice." "Justice," Jake repeated the word. "What does justice look like in this situation?" "The Draconary culture values strength and honor above all else," Helen said. "In their society, disputes are often settled through combat. Someone wrongs you, you have the right to challenge them." Jake looked at his son's bruised face. "Combat. It's not civilized by human standards," Helen continued. "But it might be the only way to get satisfaction that both sides will accept. The Draconary respects strength. If you could defeat Commander Vex in fair combat, it would prove that humans are not as weak as he believes." Amy nodded. "And it would send a message to the rest of the galaxy. They need to understand that humans will not accept attacks on their children, regardless of cultural differences." Jake thought about this. He was not a young man anymore, and Vex was a trained warrior from a species bred for combat. But Jake had advantages that the Draconary might not expect. Human military training emphasized tactics, adaptability, and fighting. Smart rather than just fighting hard. More importantly, Jake had something that Vex could never understand. He had the fury of a father whose child had been hurt. That kind of motivation could overcome a lot of physical disadvantages. "There's something else you should know," Ben said quietly. "I've been in contact with some of the other human military personnel on this station. Ship crews, security officers, even some civilians. They're all asking the same question, which is, when do we fight back?" Jake looked around the room at his team. These were good people who had come here to build peace between species. Now, they were talking about combat and revenge. But Jake understood their feelings because he felt the same way. "We're not just individuals anymore," he said slowly. "We're representatives of humanity. What we do here will affect how every human is treated in the galaxy for years to come." "Exactly," Helen said. "We let this slide. If we accept diplomatic apologies and private settlements, we're telling every alien species that they can hurt humans without consequences. We're telling them that human children are acceptable targets." Jake stood up and walked to the window that looked out into space. Somewhere out there, Admiral Carter was racing toward them with the Third Fleet. Somewhere else, billions of humans were watching and waiting to see how this would be resolved. "Commander Vex wanted to make an example of human weakness," Jake said. "Maybe it's time we showed him what human strength really looks like." Behind him, Danny made a small sound in his sleep. It was just a whisper, but it was the first sound he had made since the attack. Jake turned back to his son's bed and saw that the boy's eyes were moving beneath his closed lids. "He's dreaming," the medical scanner reported. "Brain activity is increasing. This is very positive." Jake felt tears in his eyes, but they were not tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of determination. His son was fighting to wake up, and Jake would fight to make sure he woke up to a galaxy where no one would dare hurt a human child again. "Contact Admiral Carter," he told Ben. "Tell her to maintain her approach, but to hold position when she arrives. Tell her that diplomacy is not over yet, but it's about to change dramatically in the Galactic Council." Amy asked. Jake smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. "Tell them that humanity is ready to discuss this matter." Admiral Lisa Carter stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching Nexus Prime grow larger on the main screen. Behind her, 46 other human ships moved in perfect formation. The Third Fleet had never looked more impressive or more dangerous. Lisa had been a naval officer for 30 years. She had fought pirates, explored unknown systems, and negotiated with hostile aliens. She had never felt anger like this before. The attack on Danny Morrison had awakened something in her that she did not know existed. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from Nexus Prime," her communications officer reported. "It's from the Galactic Council. They're requesting that we maintain a safe distance from the station." Lisa almost smiled. A safe distance. They were afraid. Good, they should be afraid. "Reply that we will maintain standard diplomatic distance," she said. "But make it clear that we are here on official business and will not be leaving until that business is concluded." Through the bridge windows, she could see other alien ships near the station. Some belonged to Federation members who had come to watch the diplomatic proceedings. Others were clearly military vessels, though none were as heavily armed as the human fleet. "Status report on the Morrison boy?" Lisa asked. "Last medical update shows he's stable, but still unconscious," her aide replied. "Captain Morrison has not left his son's side since the attack?" Lisa nodded. She had known Jake Morrison. For years, he was a good soldier and a better father. The idea of anyone hurting his child made her blood boil. But more than that, it made her think of her own children back on Earth, and every other human child in the galaxy. "Admiral, we're being hailed by multiple alien vessels," the communications officer said. "They want to know our intentions." "Tell them our intentions are peaceful unless someone gives us a reason to change our minds," Lisa replied. "And patch me through to Captain Morrison on the station." A few moments later, Jake's tired face appeared on the main screen. He looked like he had aged 10 years in the past day. Behind him, Lisa could see the medical equipment keeping his son alive. "Admiral Carter," Jake said. "Thank you for coming." "Is Danny?" Lisa asked. "Stable. The doctors say he might wake up soon. But Lisa, this situation is getting complicated. The Galactic Council wants to sweep this under the rug. They're calling it a cultural misunderstanding." Lisa's jaw tightened. "A cultural misunderstanding? Is that what they call nearly murdering a child?" "The Drachnary Empire is refusing to hand over Commander Vex. They say he acted within his rights, as a superior being, disciplining an inferior one." Lisa felt her hands clench into fists. Superior being. We'll see about that. "There's something else," Jake continued. "I've been thinking about challenging Vex to single combat under Drachnary honor codes. It might be the only way to get justice and avoid a larger conflict." Lisa studied Jake's face. She could see the determination there, but also the exhaustion and grief. "Jake, you're not a young man anymore. Vex is a trained Drachnary warrior. They're bred for combat." "I know the odds," Jake said, "but I also know that sometimes you have to fight even when the odds are against you, especially when it's for your child." Lisa understood. She would do the same thing if it were her child. In that medical bed. "What do you need from me?" "Keep the fleet here, but don't make any aggressive moves yet. Let me try this diplomatic route first. If it doesn't work, then we'll consider other options." "Understood." "But Jake, if that alien bastard refuses your challenge or tries to weasel out of it, I want you to know that you have the full support of humanity behind you." After ending the communication with Jake, Lisa called a meeting of her senior officers. The conference room was filled with grim faces and barely controlled anger. These were professional military officers, but they were also human beings who had been outraged by the attack on an innocent child. "Status of other human forces in the galaxy?" Lisa asked. Commander Steve Harris, her intelligence officer, pulled up a holographic display. Every human military unit within 50 light years is either heading this way or requesting permission to do so. The Second Fleet is 2 days out. The Fourth and Seventh Fleets are mobilizing from their home bases. What about civilian response? Unlike anything we've ever seen, Harris replied. Human colonies are sending supply ships, civilian transports, are carrying volunteers who want to help however they can. The Mars shipyards are working overtime to prepare additional vessels. Lisa studied the display. Red dots marked human military forces, while blue dots showed civilian ships and colonies. The pattern was clear. Humanity was mobilizing on a scale that had never been seen before. The aliens are noticing, Harris continued. Intelligence reports show that several species are concerned about the human response. They've never seen us act as a unified force like this. Captain Ellen Foster, Lisa's tactical officer, leaned forward. Admiral, I've been analyzing the defensive capabilities of Nexus Prime. The station is well protected, but it's designed to defend against single ships or small fleets. If we wanted to take it by force, we could do it. That's not our goal, Lisa said firmly. We're not here to start a war. We're here to ensure that justice is done and to send a message that attacks on human children will not be tolerated. If diplomacy fails? Foster asked. Lisa was quiet for a moment. If diplomacy fails, then we make sure the galaxy understands that humanity is not as weak as they thought. Back on Nexus Prime, Jake was preparing for the most important conversation of his life. He had requested a formal meeting with the Galactic Council to present his challenge to Commander Vex. The council chamber was filled with representatives from dozens of species, all watching with curious and sometimes hostile eyes. The council leader, an ancient being called a Wise One, spoke with a voice like wind through leaves. Captain Morrison, we understand your grief over your child's injury. However, we must handle this matter through proper diplomatic channels. Jake stood in the center of the chamber, feeling the weight of every gaze upon him. With respect, Wise One, this was not a diplomatic incident. This was an unprovoked attack on a child. In any civilized society, such actions demand justice.
Commander?
Vex sat with the Draconary delegation, his scaled face showing no emotion. He looked bored, as if this entire proceeding was beneath his notice. The Draconary have explained that their culture has different standards for discipline and respect, the Wise One continued. What happened was regrettable, but not criminal, under their laws. Jake felt anger rising in his chest, but he kept his voice calm. Then, I invoked the right of combat challenge, under Draconary honor codes. Commander Vex injured my son. I demand satisfaction through single combat. A murmur ran through the chamber.
Several?
Alien delegates looked surprised, while others seemed interested in this development. Draconary delegation exchanged glances. Commander Vex stood up slowly, his 8-foot frame towering over the other delegates. When he spoke, his voice was like gravel grinding together. You challenge me, little human? You are half my size and twice my age. This would not be combat, it would be execution. Are you refusing my challenge? Jake asked. I thought the Draconary prized honor and courage above all else. Perhaps I was wrong. Vex's eyes flashed with anger. In Draconary culture, refusing a legitimate challenge was a mark of cowardice. I accept your pathetic challenge, human. When do you wish to die? Tomorrow, Jake said without hesitation, in front of all the delegates, so they can witness what happens when someone attacks a human child. The Wise One tried to intervene. This is highly irregular. Surely we can find a more civilized solution. This is a Draconary honor challenge, Jake said. According to Federation law, it must be respected, unless the Council wishes to violate its own rules about cultural practices. The Wise One had no choice but to agree. So the challenge was officially accepted and would take place the next day in the station's main arena. As Jake left the council chamber, he felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Dr. Helen Brooks, her face filled with worry. Jake, what have you done? She asked. Vex will kill you. Shh, maybe, Jake said. but I'll make sure he remembers the fight for the rest of his life. And more importantly, every alien in that arena will see that humans don't back down when their children are threatened. That night, Jake sat beside Danny's bed, holding his son's hand. The boy's condition had improved slightly. His brain scan showed more activity. And the doctors were cautiously optimistic. "I know you can't hear me," Jake whispered to his unconscious son. "But tomorrow, I'm going to make sure that no one ever hurts you or any other human child again. I'm going to show them that we're not as weak as they think." Danny's fingers twitched slightly, as if he were responding to his father's voice. Jake chose to take it as a sign of encouragement. Outside the medical bay, Lieutenant Ben Cooper stood guard. He had been receiving reports from human forces throughout the galaxy. Response was growing stronger by the hour. If Jake lost his fight tomorrow, if the diplomatic solution failed, humanity would be ready for war. But Ben believed in his captain. Jake Morrison had never backed down from a fight in his life, and he would not start now. Tomorrow would be about more than one man fighting for his son. It would be about humanity proving its place in the galaxy. The main arena of Nexus Prime buzzed with energy unlike anything the station had ever experienced. Representatives from every major species in the galaxy filled the massive circular seating area. Some had traveled for days just to witness this moment. The air crackled with tension and anticipation. Jake Morrison stood in the fighter preparation room beneath the arena, stretching his muscles and trying to calm his mind. His body felt every one of his 43 years, but his spirit burned with the fire of a much younger man. Today was not just about personal revenge. Today was about showing the galaxy what humans were truly capable of when their children were. THREATENED. Dr. Helen Brooks checked his equipment one final time. Jake wore lightweight human combat gear designed for mobility rather than protection. The rules of Draconary honor combat for bad weapons and heavy armor. This would be a test of raw skill, strength, and determination. "Remember, stay mobile," Helen said for the 10th time. "He's bigger and stronger, but you're faster and smarter. Use that advantage." Lieutenant Ben Cooper entered the room, his face grave. "Captain, I just received word from Admiral Carter. The entire Third Fleet is in position around the station. Every human ship in this sector is watching. The pressure is enormous." Jake nodded. He could feel the weight of expectation from his entire species. But the heaviest weight was the memory of his son lying unconscious in that medical bed. His small body broken by an alien's casual cruelty. "Any word on Danny's condition?" Jake asked. "The doctors say he's stable and showing signs of improvement. His brain activity is getting stronger." Amy Rodriguez burst into the room, her eyes wide with excitement. "Captain, you need to know this. The fight is being broadcast to every human world, every ship, every settlement in the galaxy. Billions of people are watching, but it's not just humans." "What do you mean? Other species are watching too?" "The peaceful ones, like the Luminari, are curious to see if humans really will fight for their young. The aggressive ones, like the Corvalti, want to see if we're as weak as they think. This fight will determine how every alien species treats humans for decades to come." Jake felt the full weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He was no longer just a father seeking justice. For his son, he was humanity's representative in a trial by combat that would shape their future among the stars. A chime sounded, indicating it was time to enter the arena. Jake took a deep breath and walked toward the entrance tunnel. With each step, the roar of the crowd grew louder. When he emerged into the bright lights of the arena, the noise hit him like a physical force. Thousands of aliens cheered, roared, clicked, or made whatever sounds their species used to express excitement. The circular fighting area was 50 meters across, covered in a textured material that provided good footing for most species. Commander Vex Drachnos was already waiting in the center. In the bright arena lights, he looked even more intimidating than before. 8 feet tall and covered in dark green scales that gleamed like armor, he moved with the confident grace of a born predator. His yellow eyes fixed on Jake with undisguised contempt. "So the little human actually came," Vex said, his voice carrying easily across the arena. "I thought perhaps you had reconsidered this foolish challenge. Jake walked steadily toward the center, keeping his movements loose and relaxed. He had learned long ago that showing fear to a predator only made them more aggressive. "I've reconsidered many things, Commander," Jake replied. "Mostly I've been thinking about how different our species really are. Indeed, you are small, weak, and soft. I am large, strong, and hard. This will be over quickly." Jake stopped 10 feet away from Vex and looked up at the towering alien. "You're right about our differences. You don't understand what those differences really mean." The arena referee, a tall being from the neutral arbitrator species, stepped between them. "This is formal combat under Drachnary honor codes," the referee announced to the crowd. "Combat continues until one fighter yields, loses consciousness, or dies. No weapons are permitted. Do both fighters understand and accept these terms?" "I accept," Vex growled, flexing his claws. Jake thought of Danny, of Admiral Carter's fleet, of billions of humans watching across the galaxy. "I accept." The referee stepped back to the edge of the combat circle. "Fighters ready?" Both combatants nodded. "Begin." Vex moved faster than Jake had expected for such a large creature. He charged forward with a roar, his massive claws sweeping toward Jake's head in an arc that would have torn it clean off if it connected. But Jake had been preparing for this moment. He dropped into a crouch and rolled to his right, feeling the wind from Vex's claws pass inches above his head. The crowd gasped as Jake came up running, already moving to circle around his opponent. Vex spun to follow him, his face showing surprise. Most species would have tried to meet his charge head-on, relying on their own strength. Humans, it seemed, had different ideas about combat. "Stand still and fight like a warrior," Vex roared. "This is how humans fight," Jake replied, continuing. "To circle, we use our brains." Vex charged again, this time trying to tackle Jake to the ground, where his size advantage would be overwhelming. Jake waited until the last possible second, then stepped aside and struck the Drachnary hard in the ribs as he passed. His fist felt like it had hit a stone wall. But Vex grunted and stumbled slightly. For the next several minutes, they danced around each other in a deadly ballet. Vex would attack with devastating power, and Jake would dodge and counter with quick, precise strikes. The Drachnary was incredibly strong, but his attacks were predictable. He relied on the same patterns over and over, expecting his opponents to simply stand there and be destroyed. Jake was faster and more tactical, but he could not keep this pace up forever. He was already breathing hard, while Vex seemed barely winded. Jake needed to change his strategy before his stamina gave out. When Vex charged for the 4th time, Jake did something unexpected. Instead of dodging to the side, he dropped to the ground and swept Vex's legs with both of his own. The massive Drachnary crashed to the arena floor with a sound like thunder, his scales scraping against the fighting surface. Jake pounced immediately, trying to apply a chokehold he had learned in military training. But Vex's neck was too thick, and his scales too tough for the technique to work properly. The Drachnary grabbed Jake with both hands and hurled him across the arena like a toy. Jake hit the far wall hard, his ribs screaming with pain. He tasted blood and felt something crack in his chest, but he forced himself to roll and get back to his feet, just as Vex charged again, roaring with rage at being taken down. This time Jake could not dodge fast enough. Vex's massive fist caught him in the stomach, lifting him completely off the ground and sending him crashing into the arena wall again. Jake slid down the wall and collapsed, gasping for air. The crowd fell silent. Many had expected the human to lose eventually, but the speed of his defeat was shocking. Even species that disliked humans had been impressed by his initial performance. Vex approached slowly, confident that the fight was over. His yellow eyes gleamed with satisfaction as he looked down at the broken human. "Yield, little one," Vex said, his voice almost gentle now. "You fought better than I expected, but this was always going to be the outcome. Yield and I will end this quickly." Jake struggled to his feet, using the wall for support. Blood ran from his mouth and his vision was blurry. Every breath sent fire through his damaged ribs. But in his mind, he could see Danny lying unconscious in that hospital bed, his small skull fractured by this creature's casual violence. "You want me to yield?" Jake asked, wiping blood from his lips. It would be wise. Jake pushed himself away from the wall and stood as straight as he could manage. Around the arena, the viewing screens showed his battered face to the watching. Billions. But they also showed something else in his eyes, something that made even Vex take an involuntary step backward. "You hurt my son," Jake said quietly, but his voice somehow carried to every corner of the silent arena. "You nearly killed a 12-year-old boy because you thought he was beneath your notice. You want to know what's really beneath you, Vex?" Jake began walking toward the Draknari, not running or charging, but walking with steady, implacable determination. "You are." Vex swung at him again, putting all his strength behind the blow. But this time Jake was ready. He ducked under the massive fist and drove his own fist upward into Vex's solar plexus, with every ounce of strength he had left. The Draknari doubled over, gasping for air. "You think humans are weak because we're smaller than you," Jake continued, grabbing Vex's head and driving his knee upward into the alien's face. "Because we don't have claws or scales or natural weapons." Vex's head snapped back and he staggered, green blood flowing from his broken nose. "But you don't understand what real strength is," Jake said, striking Vex in the throat with a precise blow that made the Draknari choke and gasp for breath. Vex tried to grab Jake, but his movements were clumsy now, confused by pain and lack of air. Jake stepped inside his reach and delivered a series of rapid strikes to nerve clusters and pressure points that he had learned during 20 years of military service. "Real strength isn't about size or claws," Jake said as Vex dropped to one knee, struggling to stay conscious. "Real strength is protecting those who cannot protect themselves."